Diplomatic officials in Seoul examine the reason behind the U.S. placing an ally on its sensitive countries list, citing security-related issues rather than those tied to foreign policy. Korea's car exports broke previous records to hit over $6 billion last month, as demand for hybrid cars in particular stayed strong. Israel has launched strikes on Gaza amid stalled ceasefire talks with Hamas, reportedly killing over 300 people, including many children. It's March 18th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We begin with the latest on what's taken as confusion on the diplomatic front. The authorities explained that South Korea being designated as a sensitive country by the U.S. Energy Department reportedly comes in line with security concerns. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae In-ji reports.
Concerns are rising after South Korea, a key U.S. ally, was recently added to the U.S. Energy Department's sensitive and other designated countries list, alongside North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran. While South Korea is in the lowest tier as other designated countries, it is the only U.S. ally with a formal defense treaty. Following communication with the U.S., Seoul's foreign ministry confirmed that South Korea's inclusion is due to security-related issues, rather than foreign policy concerns. The government also clarified that the U.S. has said the designation will not significantly impact joint energy research or technology cooperation. The ministry further highlighted that it's closely cooperating with the U.S., while noting that South Korea has been on the list in the past and was removed through similar diplomatic efforts. According to a report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, in 1996, South Korea was previously on the DOE sensitive country list from January 1993 to June 1996. But the report added that South Korea was a country no longer considered sensitive as of July 28, 1994. But despite the government's explanation, many experts still believe there are other reasons behind the matter. Because the U.S. list cites concerns over national security and nuclear proliferation, some observers in Seoul suggest it has to do with growing discussions on the need for South Korea to acquire its own nuclear weapons capability.
I think that's the biggest reason. The main reason why the U.S. Department of Energy would designate a specific country to its sensitive countries list is nuclear non-proliferation.
Others believe South Korea's domestic political situation may have influenced the move, since the U.S. decision made in January follows President Yoon's martial law declaration on December 3rd.
Once the Constitutional Court's decision on the impeachment is announced, the political turmoil in South Korea will be resolved. In that case, there would be no reason for the Trump administration to keep South Korea on this list.
Meanwhile, the acting U.S. ambassador to Seoul, Joseph Yoon, said on Tuesday that the Energy Department's listing was not a serious matter that could affect bilateral relations, adding that the matter was not a big deal. He explained that Seoul was put on the DOE list due to some mishandling of sensitive information that should not be taken out of laboratories, without further elaboration. Nonetheless, Seoul is looking to actively engage with Washington to resolve the issue before the designation takes effect on April 15th, with Trade Minister An Deok-gun set to visit the U.S. later this week to meet with his counterpart. Bae In-ji, Arirang News.
For a closer look, our Bae In-ji, who has been following the story, joins us in the studio. Un-ji, so unlike what the acting U.S. ambassador said, as we just saw in your report, it seems like Seoul is not taking this issue lightly.
That's right. This was a huge blow to South Korea, as this could mean potentially hindering technology and science cooperation with the United States. And as you mentioned, another problem was that the Korean government was not aware of this for 2 months, leading to harsh criticism from the public. South Korea was put on the list in January, shortly before then-President Joe Biden left office. But this month, the government began to ramp up efforts to overturn the decision. And in fact, the foreign ministry said in a press briefing today that they are taking the situation very seriously. But whether the Trump administration will reconsider the move remains to be seen.
As for the reason behind the listing, there appear to be lots of different speculation, and some have suggested this may have been linked to an institution under the U.S. Energy Department. Tell us about that.
That's right. Some observers have said that the U.S. listing may have to do with a recent incident at Idaho National Laboratory, a research institution under the U.S. Department of Energy, where security regulations were breached. In a report to Congress last year, the department said it fired the laboratory's contractor employee who tried to board a flight to South Korea with export-controlled information on nuclear reactor design software. But it was not immediately clear if this case contributed to the designation. And some say a single incident would not have led to such a significant decision by the U.S. government. So questions persist over why South Korea was placed in the lowest category of the Energy Department's sensitive countries list.
We will have to see how it unfolds. Thank you, Angie, for the report.
Thank you.
Washington apparently continues sending a message to its trading partners ahead of President Trump's reciprocal tariffs in April, this time identifying Korea as a major trade deficit country, likely referring to non-tariff trade barriers. Shin Ha-young explains.
With about 2 weeks until the announcement of reciprocal tariff plans, a top economic aide to U.S. President Donald Trump mentioned South Korea as a major trade deficit country. U.S. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett told CNBC on Monday that trade deficits with Europe, China, and South Korea have persisted for years, claiming the deficits are attributable to the country's high tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers. He added that if U.S. trading partners immediately lower all barriers, the negotiations will be over. Since South Korea and the U.S. have a free trade agreement that removes tariffs on most items, Hassett's statement is raising expectations of increased pressure on South Korea to lower non-tariff trade barriers.
The Trump administration is focused on fixing trade imbalances and seems to be taking a one-on-one approach with countries that have large trade deficits. For South Korea, this could mean either imposing tariffs to reduce imports or negotiating to lower barriers, so South Korea can import more from the U.S.
The expert from the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy emphasized the need for South Korea to review its contributions to the U.S. and assess potential U.S. demands on non-tariff trade barriers.
We need to review our contributions to the U.S. and potential demands from the U.S. on non-tariff trade barriers. However, with many uncertainties, it's too early for negotiations.
Meanwhile, during the interview with CNBC, Hassett said there will be some uncertainty between now and April 2nd, referring to the date Trump is set to unveil his reciprocal tariff plans. His comments come as market analysts and business leaders have criticized the sweeping tariff announcements, which have led to volatility in world markets. However, Hassett defended Trump's tariffs against Mexico, Canada, and China, calling them very positive developments, adding things will clear up after April 2nd. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Over in the Middle East, Israel has resumed strikes on Gaza amid its fragile ceasefire with Hamas. More than 300 people have been reportedly killed, including many children. Cha Yoon-kyung has the latest.
The Israeli Prime Minister's office said on Tuesday morning that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz have instructed the Israel Defense Forces to take firm action against the armed militant group Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The office announced that such action follows Hamas' repeated refusal to release Israeli hostages, as well as its continuous rejection of all proposals from mediators. Katz reiterated that Israel will continue to fight in the Gaza Strip if all hostages are not returned home. destroying much of the housing and infrastructure in Gaza, including the hospital system. Israel's surprise attack could mean a return to fighting in the 17-month war that has killed thousands of Palestinians and caused widespread destruction across the region, according to AP News. Bloomberg also reported that the sudden airstrike by Israel shatters the ceasefire deal with Hamas, as Israel carried out the most deadly offensive since the ceasefire took effect 2 months ago, killing more than 320, including women and children. With Netanyahu vowing to use increasing military strength against Hamas, the militant group has strongly criticized the IDF and accused Netanyahu of overturning the ceasefire agreement and leaving the remaining hostages in Gaza to an unknown fate. Meanwhile, Israelis whose family members are still being held hostage in Gaza have demanded to meet with Netanyahu and his officials after the resumption of airstrikes on the enclave. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump declares that any strike against the U.S. by Yemen's Houthi rebels will be considered a strike by Iran and that Iran would face, quote, dire consequences. Park Kwon-woo covers his remarks and more.
U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran that it will be held responsible for any further attacks or retaliation by Yemen's Houthi rebels, long backed by Tehran. Calling the Houthis sinister mobsters and thugs, Trump posted on social media Monday that every shot fired by the rebels will be seen as being fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and that there will be dire consequences. The White House even reinforced Trump's stance, urging that Iran take the warnings seriously. Such threats came after the U.S. launched a new series of airstrikes over the weekend, which, according to the Houthi-run health ministry, targeted more than 30 Yemeni group sites and killed at least 53 people. The U.S. continued its attacks on Monday, targeting the Red Sea port city of Hodeida and Al-Jaf governorate, north of the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. While the Pentagon said strikes will continue in the coming days, it added that will persist until the Houthis cease their attacks.
The Houthis could stop this tomorrow if they said, we're going to stop shooting at your people. But they've clearly chosen not to do that.
Amid these warnings from the U.S., Iran's United Nations envoy, through a letter on Monday, told the UN Security Council that Trump and other U.S. officials had made reckless and provocative statements that leveled baseless accusations against Tehran. He also said that the U.S. had threatened the use of force against him, adding that Washington is seeking to unlawfully justify its acts of aggression and war crimes against Yemen. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
The top diplomats of South Korea, Japan, and China are to hold talks this week in Tokyo. Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol will have a three-way meeting with his Japanese counterpart, Takeshi Iwaya, and Chinese counterpart Wang Yi on Saturday. The talks come for the first time in more than a year since November 2023. The three sides are to assess the progress of trilateral cooperation since their leaders' summit that took place in May last year and exchange views on regional and international issues. Cho is to hold one-on-one talks with his Japanese and Chinese counterparts as well, with the key agenda to be about preparations for the 60th anniversary of the normalization of Seoul-Tokyo ties with Iwaya and the APEC summit with Wang. On the trade front, findings for the month of February show Korean automakers noted substantial growth in sales at home and shipments overseas. Moon Ji-young covers the latest data.
The South Korean auto industry remained strong in February, showing double-digit growth in production, exports, and domestic sales compared to the same month last year. That's according to the latest Automotive Trends report released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy on Tuesday, which showed the country's auto exports surpassed the $6 billion mark for the first time for any February, rising by 17.8% year-on-year. By export volume, the number of car shipments came to 233,000. The export growth in February is attributed to a base effect resulting from an increase in the number of working days, as February 2024 had fewer working days due to the Lunar New Year holiday falling in that month. Despite difficulties in the EV market, eco-friendly car exports experienced a year-on-year increase of 32%. While EV exports dipped by 2%, hybrid car exports surged by a remarkable 61.7%. In terms of domestic production, South Korean carmakers produced 17.1% more vehicles, breaking the 350,000 mark for the first time since February 2014. Regarding domestic sales, 14.8% more vehicles were sold compared to the same period last year, totaling 133,000. Notably, EV sales increased by a whopping 298% year-on-year. The Ministry of Industry attributed this increase to a tax credit that has reduced the individual consumption tax on cars by 30% in the first half of the year, as well as the early implementation of EV subsidies announced in mid-January. With the new Trump administration proposing tariffs on automobiles starting next month, Seoul is taking steps to mitigate the impacts of these levies on the South Korean auto industry. The Trade Ministry announced it would form a dedicated task force to closely monitor the situation and gather opinions from domestic auto firms, and would soon prepare a more detailed response plan. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
The National Assembly is set to ask the government to come up with a draft for a supplementary budget within this month. This came on Tuesday after Speaker Woo Won-sik held a meeting with the floor leaders of the ruling People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea. DP lawmaker Park Sung-jun argued that the government has been passive when it comes to a supplementary budget, so the two main parties felt the need to urge the government to create one. PPP lawmaker Park Hyung-jun added that the authority to draft a supplementary budget lies with the government, so the parliament cannot force it to submit a proposal by a certain deadline, but the intention is to fully coordinate with the government. Korean historical art treasures are being showcased at Germany's 400-year-old Dresden's Royal Palace. According to the National Museum of Korea on Tuesday, this large-scale exhibition, the first of its kind in Germany in 25 years, is being held in collaboration with the Dresden State Art Collections. Among the highlights is one of the famous gold crowns from the Silla Kingdom, often referred to as the City of Gold, dating back around 1,500 years. The exhibition, which opened on Saturday, will run until August and features over 300 Korean artifacts, including items from the Lee collection. Art restoration plays a crucial part in safeguarding cultural heritage, and efforts between private and public sectors, as well as those across borders, go a long way to better protecting national treasures. Lee Yoon-jin tells us more.
The Lium Museum of Art will be displaying 2 Korean artifacts from the 19th century following their restoration. The 8-panel screen titled Welcoming Banquet of the Governor of Pyongan illustrates the boat ride crossing the Taedong River and the banquet welcoming the newly appointed governor of Pyongan Province in 1826 during the Joseon Dynasty. Since 1927, this artifact has been housed in the Peabody Essex Museum in Massachusetts in the United States. There had been severe wear from leaving its homeland and over the passage of time, and the 8 panels were stored separately, making it difficult to even determine their exact sequence. It took over 16 months for its restoration.
There were parts of the painting missing, from small details to the entire bottom chunks, so we focused on how we could blend those parts without adding new brushstrokes.
Accompanying the folding screen is the hwarot, a traditional wedding robe worn by women during the Joseon era as early as the year 1392. With only about 50 versions of this garment surviving today, the hwarot was once reserved for royalty and aristocrats before becoming common among ordinary brides. It took experts in Dankook University roughly 13 months to restore the hwarot, including research on the fabric and dye of its material and embroidery techniques.
We stuck to a few rules. Don't harm the original form, remove the cause of the damages as much as possible, and contribute to adding to the beauty of the hwarot.
The 2 artifacts that have been restored with Korean technology belong to the Peabody Essex Museum in the United States, which has been buying Korean artifacts since the beginning of diplomatic relations between the 2 countries in the late 1800s. And in 2003, as part of the museum's expansion project, its new wing included a gallery devoted entirely to Korean arts.
We are accepting support from various organizations around the world for our conservation program. We had decided that the support needed for the preservation work of the Peabody Essex pieces would come from such programs.
So far, the Overseas Korean Cultural Heritage Foundation has supported 58 projects across 10 different countries, not only ensuring that the Korean cultural heritage overseas is preserved, but also displaying them to a global audience. But this is the first time that a private art museum has taken part in the restoration efforts as a contribution to society. After the special exhibition at Leum, the Peabody Essex Museum will showcase the 2 restored Korean objects in May. 이은진, 아리랑 뉴스.
Unusual heavy snow and gusty winds have covered the whole country amid a cold snap. With icy air, the temperatures stay low during the day all over the country. The snow will continue tomorrow with the daytime temperature rising to only 7 degrees Celsius in Seoul, and it will feel even colder than the actual readings. Heavy snow has been falling everywhere from last night. As for snowfall, up to 20 centimeters or more is expected in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province and between 10 to 20 centimeters in the northeastern mountainous areas of Gyeongsang-buk-do province, with 1 to 10 centimeters in other areas until tonight. Tomorrow morning will be just as cold as today, with Daejeon at -3 degrees and Gyeongju at -2 degrees. Highs will move up to 9 degrees in Daejeon, Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju. Typical spring weather for this time of year will make a return on Thursday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.